We're talking to Congressman Tom Petri of Wisconsin, who is chairman of the subcommittee on highways, but also one of the leaders in the Congress on education. And however, I want to talk to you about the climate that exists here today that you and I experienced when we first came here. How do you look at the situation today?
Well, there's been a lot of changes. Of course, we've always had a competitive political situation,
right,
and
sure.
that the purpose of one of the purposes of the Congress is to give people a chance to have their different views represented, and people come from all across the country to faithfully, as best they can, represent their constituents who don't always agree with everyone in every other place in the country. And there's a lot of talk about, well, more partisanship, more right-wing or left-wing. And
polarization,
there is some
actually.
sort of polarization, but I don't. We've had tremendous polarization in our country in the past, not necessarily on what we would think of today as an ideological basis, but on a geographic basis.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we know
South.
of our Civil War. No one who knows anything about American history can but say that was the sort of one of the most difficult and important crucibles in our development as a nation, and people were in the Congress were clubbing each other.
That's right.
So they weren't being discivil
right.
just with words.
The caning that took place.
And the ones who did it, the caney and the caner, were, I think, from Massachusetts and from South Carolina.
Yes.
Both were unanimously or re-elected by acclamation. And that kind of was a signal almost from the Congress that people were no longer willing to compromise. They were dividing themselves into warring camps. And we had this election where Lincoln emerged, but as a minority president in a very divided country. And there were people who were trying to keep things together, but they were no longer able to be effective. And so anyway, nowadays we have, of course, the media and transportation revolution is from when you and I were there. It used to be people would take the train out to Washington from California or Seattle, and they might go back once or twice in a Congress.
Sure.
So half of the Congress lived far enough away. It was not very easy to get back and forth. It could take 4 or 5 days to get to Seattle by train. So most members lived with their families in Washington. Now, with its great, wonderful aviation system that we've got, you can be anywhere in the country in a matter of hours. And so most members of Congress have their families in their districts. Very few spend any time beyond what's required to do the congressional work while the body's in session in the nation's capital. I think that's meant they're spending less time working on legislation and on the leaving more to the staff and that sort of thing. And as a result, they're spending less time getting to know each other, and
especially
and it makes it
since
harder.
the idea of the card, your voting cards today, and the electronic voting.
Yeah, I don't particularly like the electronic voting. It came in I've always had electronic voting in the Congress, but I think it went in just as when it was 78 might have been the last time, and they were still at the beginning by custom behaving in Congress as they had when it was not electronic. It used to be, you could tell me better than I, but it used to be that you'd call the names of the 435 members of Congress, then you'd call them again.
That's correct.
And then at the end of that time, there would be an awful lot that would be running in and giving their name because they were still there. So that process would take probably 3 or 4 hours.
The other part of it, we had more votes, I think, even in those days than you've had recently. But the fact is that you could talk to other members. You'd have time during the roll call that members would be standing around, and you'd talk to them about legislation or home or what have you. And there was a much more convivial type of atmosphere that you had than you probably have today. But I want to get to one point. You were one of the originators of the Ripon Society. Could you tell us a little bit about the Ripon Society and how it evolved?
Well, the Ripon Society was a effort to try to link what was they called the world of ideas and the world of politics, and the idea was that there are factions, and you're trying to get a majority of the votes. But if you have a good idea, it's easier to get a vote. Then you have better to have what are you going to do? Well, I have this good idea. I'd like so the thought was that maybe it could be that there were ideas that people in research institutes and in universities and other places were developing that might be translated into public policy or political issues even better than had been at the time it started. Now, since then, it was just starting that all these think tanks and other things that exist in Washington were being developed. But it was really an effort to try to help, in this case, the Republican Party wasn't to be left or right. It was more to be trying to come up with new ideas that would actually solve the nation's problems. That maybe because there had been changes in technology or in communication or other things could be, or someone just had a good idea that might help. So we developed a whole series of policy proposals back. This is a long time ago now. One of them was the volunteer military. That it's not a completely new idea, but helping to work on it and promote it was one of the ideas at that time.
Well, certainly, if there was a type of volunteerism that you projected at that time that we continue today, life would be much more, would be a lot easier, I think.
Well, at least it's trying to focus on the future and be positive and talk about solutions. And it may not be, every solution isn't going to be the greatest solution in the world, but if you have a positive mental attitude and you are open to that, maybe someone can say, well, that's partly right, let's build on it and make it better, rather than just being negative all the time.
I want to get to one other aspect, and that is your leadership in the highway program.
Yeah.
Where do we stand on that today?
Well, we've had, going back to the Eisenhower administration, I think it's been a very successful federal-state partnership in surface transportation. In the East, particularly, there had been Pennsylvania Turnpike and some other parkways, but this was expanded nationwide, and it's transformed America, and the opportunities for people to see the country and to travel and to efficient transportation undergirds our economy and prosperity. It's been funded, debated, and set up this program, Transportation Trust Fund. Money goes into it on the basis of use of the highways, and the proxy for that is buying gasoline or diesel fuel. 18.4 cents a gallon gasoline tax. I can't remember exactly what the diesel fuel tax is. Anyway, that is then distributed to the states, and the states actually run each a little differently. The business of contracting and maintaining as whatever their approach is within the federal framework, the National Highway System. We review that and update it every 4 or 5 years, and we're due to do that now with the Service Transportation Program. The real issue we're facing is that the federal gas tax has not, and diesel fuel taxes have not changed since 1990 1993. Now, if you buy a 1993 car, you're not going to get the same mileage as you're going to if you buy a 2014 car.
Right.
So that's great. You're getting more mileage. Everything's much more efficient. Lighter materials, but the money coming into the trust fund is going down because the amount of gasoline people need for the same amount of travel has been going down, and of course there's been some inflation since 1993. The costs of maintaining things have gone up, and the money coming into the Transportation Trust Fund currently only pays for about 60% of the existing program.
Is that right? It used to have a surplus.
Yeah. So we need to come up with, if we want to do a 6-year bill, we're running about just maintain current level, assuming no real growth in the program. We need to come up with about $75 or $80 billion minimum, and really ideally $100 billion over 6 years to fill in the gap and grow the program.
Would that
a
mean
bit.
further taxation, though?
Well, we'd probably, at the end of the day, we're looking at every opportunity. No one likes the word taxation.
Right, sure.
The American Trucking Association represents truckers. Mm-hmm. Their job is not to make life more difficult for truckers, it's to make it easier for truckers. And they've come in and said they are in favor of increasing the diesel fuel tax on their members. Not that they want to make things more hard, but they can't think of they would prefer we have good roads and someone's got to pay for them,
sure.
So they're willing to do their share. They're nervous also that if we don't pay for it with diesel fuel and gasoline taxes, we're going to end up paying for it with more tolls and other things that will be less efficient. Sure. But we're wrestling with that, and as you know, I think it was our friend Winston Churchill who said, "You can always count on Americans to do the right thing after they've explored every other alternative." And we're in the process of exploring every other alternative when it comes to paying for the federal highway program.
The road system that we have in our country has done much to contribute to our being able to be competitive in the world,
right,
because of the efficiency of our road system.
Oh, they call it logistics, and being able to move things. When I was first running for Congress, I met an old fellow who, and he said, sit down in a cafe in a small town in my district. And he said, I want you to know one of my first jobs, he was an older man, he ran a farm, was to drive the congressman in 1926 to Washington as a kid. And he said it took us 6 days because there was no interstate road system. Roads were just being developed for automobiles. They didn't have bridges. People take all this stuff for granted now. But you had to wait for a ferry and for a crossing, and sometimes it was only, wasn't that often, depending on how big the river. Nowadays, you can drive it in a matter of hours, but it's a tremendous thing that we take for granted. But we've got to maintain it.
And it makes us more competitive. For example, the Chinese are having a difficult time because of the question of the lack of a road system that we do have.
Yeah.
And this makes us more competitive in the world.
Yeah.
And people take a lot for granted as to what society can, or what Congress can give them. And they ask for a lot, but aren't willing to pay for it.
Well, I think they prefer not to, but at the end of the day, if there's people will do it, but they'll complain a lot. But that's human nature.
Congressman, I really appreciate your coming here today. I think we've learned a lot about, specifically on the student loan question, which is a prime interest, I'm sure, of a great portion of our country. And we hope you'll come back again in the very near future.
Well, Congressman Wolff, thank you very much for having me on your show.
Now, until next week at the same time, this is Lester Wolff saying so long from Washington.